back to the TWTL podcast as we begin our coverage of Jesus Messiah. I will be bringing you my experiences, observations, and insights from being involved in the Jesus Messiah cast. Each week I'll recap the various practices that I'm involved in, what my role is in these various scenes that we practice, and my thoughts on the scenes as a whole. You'll hear about what I feel the spiritual implications of each scene are, the practical nature of the practices, and how I interact with various cast members, especially the apostles, of which I'm one. I was involved in Above All, which was the previous drama production that the Pentecostals of Alexandria put on, and I was an apostle in that for 2 years, and I'm reprising my role as Matthew, the apostle, in Jesus Messiah. So you're going to get a lot of perspective on what it is to be an apostle in this cast, and how I interact with various other members of the cast, but mostly what it's like to be an apostle in this cast. So what is Jesus Messiah? It's a retelling of the story of Christ's earthly ministry. And a large portion of this production is going to focus on the miraculous works of Christ and its effect on those around him. Other elements included will be his most recognizable sermons, like the Sermon on the Mount. Also included will be the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus, as well as both modern and historical representative scenes that reveal the impact of Christ's message and actions on those at the time of his ministry and those who follow him today. Now, how is Jesus Messiah going to be different than Above All? Above All was 4 years of production, and it had a great impact on the Central Louisiana community, and even drew people from all over the country and even other parts of the world. And what Above All's main focus was is that and we've covered this on our website, twtlministries.com, and our YouTube channel, and we'll provide links for that so if you want to go back and look over those things. But the focus of Above All was primarily on the last days of Christ's life. Now, while there were some modern characters and some flashback sequences to other parts of his ministry, the primary focus of Above All was on the final week of Christ's life and what he was going through and who he interacted with and the effects of that final week on him and how that final week still speaks to us today. Whereas Jesus Messiah is going to have a more holistic view of the ministry of Christ. It's going to focus on the early parts of his ministry. It's going to focus on the middle parts of his ministry. It's going to focus on people who were impacted by his ministry. And yes, it will focus on the final week of Christ's life, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension. Now, another difference between Above All and Jesus Messiah is that Above All used video projection to create the settings. Basically, they had these giant video projectors hanging from the ceiling, and they project on the wall this very high-tech looking projection that made it look like you were really in Jerusalem, or really in the countryside, or really in the Garden of Eden, really on Mount Golgotha. And it was a really cool effect, but it kind of limited actors. You had to do your best to immerse yourself in this very abstract kind of setting, even though you could see on the walls where you were at and everything, because there wasn't any physical things to interact with. It made it a little bit difficult for the cast members and even at times for the audience members to immerse themselves in this. And Jesus Messiah is bringing back what the previous before Above All production, which was called Messiah. It's bringing back physical sets. Now, there's going to be the tomb of Christ, which will also double as a mountain. There's going to be a garden/wilderness setting, and there's going to be a temple setting. And these are all carved out of styrofoam and reinforced with wood and metal scaffolding. So these are things that you're going to see the cast interact with. You're going to see people standing on it, and they're going to be moving around it and everything. So it's going to make it a little bit easier for the cast to really immerse themselves in each setting, and it's going to hopefully make the audience feel like they are really out there in the wilderness with Jesus, or right there at the Sermon on the Mount, or when the tomb is and the stone from the tomb is rolled away, or you're in the temple. You're going to, hopefully it's going to help immerse the audience in the actual production. They've even built trees using some metal reinforcement that people are going to be able to climb on. So you're going to see people all over the place. And the way these productions always are, there's going to be cast members moving throughout the audience too to really help bring the audience into the production. Now, while the sets are artificially created, the artistry and the carving and the detail and the painting really makes you feel like you're looking at a mountain, or that you're really looking at the countryside, or the interior of the ancient temple. And the detail that's going to be put in. You're going to see what looks like real grass, and the trees are going to have what looks like real leaves on them, and the etching and the stone makes it look not like it's a styrofoam set, but like we really brought a bunch of stones in and made it look like a mountain. And so it's going to have a much more realistic feel to it, and we're excited about that. Having been in Above All and having to do my best to pretend like I'm really in the temple, now I can actually be in the temple and act like I'm really in the countryside, and now it feels like I really am in the countryside. It's just going to make it a lot easier for the cast to get wrapped up in the actual setting, and it makes the setting come alive and be a part, almost as its own character of the production. Now, the stage itself was raised in some places by over a foot from the regular platform in the POA sanctuary. This means that I think at some points the stage is over 5 feet tall, and it's really it's going to allow for better sight lines. And it's going to allow for any audience member, no matter where you're seated at, to have a really great view of what's going on the platform. There's some elements involved in the set that I don't have full information on because it's not 100% complete yet, but as we go along, I'll update you on the process of that. And I know they're currently building the temple, and it's right now it's just a bunch of plywood built up and everything, and so but the mountain is all completed for the most part, and a good portion of the wilderness settings completed. But I'll update you as we go along, and I don't think I'm going to be able to take any pictures or anything like that, but I'll do my best to describe what it looks like. So moving on from how it's different from Above All, what practices have occurred so far? I've been involved in several practices. We began in early February, well, actually late January. So it's been about 3 weeks of practices, but I wanted to get really immersed in it and be able to have enough content to be able to provide to you, because we're not practicing every day. It's only several practices so far that I've been involved in, about 2 a week. So I wanted to have enough practices built up to actually talk to you about that. My group, the Apostles, we've only practiced in, I think, 3 scenes. One is the triumphal entry scene where Jesus is going to ride on the donkey. We don't have a donkey yet, but basically walking through the entire auditorium, and we're not going upstairs or anything like that, obviously with the donkey, but there are going to be people coming out from the balcony and everything, and we're going to be walking through the entire bottom floor of the congregation. So if you're seated on the bottom floor, you're going to have a chance to see Jesus up and close. And so that's going to be really great, because in these kind of things, you don't want to just have to be looking at a stage. You're going to be able to look all around you and see people running and shouting and having a great time in this scene. And Jesus is going to be within a few feet of you at some point, if you're lucky to have a close seat to an aisle. And even if not, he's going to be right next to your section if you're on that bottom floor. And if you're in the balcony, he's going to be on your side of the church at some point. So in that one scene, and there's going to be a lot of elements going into that scene. They've changed it up a little bit from the old Messiah days and the Above All days. So it's going to be really interesting. Another scene was the Beatitudes scene, and the first time we practiced, we didn't have the mountain, so Jesus just kind of sat in a chair, and it's hard to find out where you're supposed to be at because there's no mountain there, and where are we going to put everybody? But we've practiced that now, I believe, 2 or 3 times, and they've got the mountain up now, and I know where I'm supposed to be standing, and everybody knows where they're supposed to be standing, and Jesus is walking up the mountain and everything. So it's a very 3-dimensional kind of setting where we're starting on the bottom floor and we're working our way up to the top of the platform, and then he's walking up the mountain, and people are all over the stage and in the audience and everything. So it's a really neat scene that utilizes the full dimensions of the production. Now, like I said, in these early practices, main point is to pretty much find out where everybody needs to be at the outset of a scene. And I'm not going to tell you about the third scene, by the way, because I don't want to spoil anything just yet. Maybe later on I'll mention what the scene is, and I will mention what the scene is. We practiced it a couple times. It's an awesome miracle, and we don't know what the full special effects are going to be in the miracle, but it's going to be really neat. So I'll tell you more about that in another podcast. But pretty much these scenes, we've been trying to figure out, well, where's everybody supposed to be coming in from, and how are they supposed to be walking on the stage and around the stage and around the sets and everything, because they want to make sure the details are ironed out to the in air quotes, the least character involved. And we end up running through these scenes a couple of times each practice. And by a couple times, I mean we get to the end of the scene a couple times each practice. But we're running through certain specific elements of each scene constantly. We'll start off, and there's a lot of start and stopping in these early goings. And you start off, and you're about 15 seconds in the scene, and then our main director, Brother Keith Skluzacek, he says, "Stop, go back to your doors." And he's not doing that to be mean. He's doing that because he's watching each door and seeing how people come out. And he's like, well, I need more people at this door. I need more people at that door because I want people coming out of every door, especially the Jerusalem scene. And so it can get kind of frustrating because you start and then you stop and you go back and you start and you stop and you start and you stop. That's going on for 2 hours. But in these early practices, if he can get that down, then once we get to the all-day practices and the more detailed practices, the only thing we have to focus on is what's the meat of this thing. Right now we're trying to figure out the corners involved in this production. If you're looking at it like a puzzle, we're basically trying to get the corners of the puzzle and the edges of the puzzle together before we get to the middle of the puzzle to create, hopefully, a beautiful portrait. Now, another thing that we're doing is we're wearing full costumes from the outset. We're not just walking around in modern clothing because they want us to get used to walking around in robes. For a guy, I don't wear a robe. So, but when I walk up the stairs, if I'm not used to walking up the stairs in a robe, I'm going to be tripping over my robe. If I'm not wearing my costume and it's flopping around in certain places, it's too late if we're getting to the week before the production to start wearing my costume. So, and those costumes can get kind of uncomfortable because you got layers on, and so it can get kind of hot early on, especially when you're starting and stopping, and there's a little bit of frustration here and there, and you're trying to get in character, and he breaks you out of character because he stops the scene, and you got all this costume on and everything, but you just do your best, and you're getting used to being in this character completely. Now, most practices I've been involved in, another thing is he's been telling us how we're supposed to stand on the stage. And if you're standing on the stage, your front needs to be to the audience. Because if you turn your back on the audience, then you're being disrespectful to the audience. They paid good money. They don't want to see your back. They want to see how you're reacting. And you can only do that if you find your front. And there's ways in which you do it. The way your feet are supposed to be planted at like 45-degree angles. And your shoulders are supposed to be straight across. And you're not looking straight at the middle of the church. You're looking at where the most people in the audience are. And you've got to kind of contort and move your body in a way that's uncomfortable to you, but it allows for people throughout the audience to see your reaction. And it's not about what you would think you would do naturally. It's about what's going to be able to convey the scene most effectively. So that's another element in these early practices. But most of them have been happening from 7 to 9 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And I think we've done a couple on Saturday during the day. And so, that kind of gets wearing on you because you've been working all day and get home and rush to eat, and then you get ready and you go drive up to the church and you get out and you practice for a couple hours, and then you come back home and you get undressed, take a shower, and kind of have a snack, and then go to bed. That's pretty much what it is when you're doing these kind of practices. But they do have a couple Wednesday night practices as well. I'm not involved in any of those as of yet. This has been so they can do specific work with specific characters with lots of lines, and they can focus on these characters with their lines in those Wednesday night practices, so that when we get to these Thursday, Friday, and Saturday practices and Tuesday practices, that they can just focus on where everybody's supposed to be at, because they know this guy's already got his lines down. He's already got his reactions down because they've had a directors looking at him and scrutinizing him for a couple hours on a Wednesday night to make sure, okay, this guy knows what he's doing, so now we can focus on all this other stuff. So the approach that they have in the structure of the practices has really worked out to the benefit to where we haven't had a practice where it's been bad. I'm not going to tell you, last night we had one where everything wasn't clicking perfectly. But we did our best and we got through it several times, and we learned some stuff. We learned how we're supposed to feel in that scene. And that's where you get into the meat of it. We're starting to fill in a couple of those middle pieces of this puzzle. Is now we're not just coming in and making sure we're standing where we're supposed to be standing. Now it's like, how are you supposed to be thinking in this scene? How are you supposed to be reacting to what Christ is saying in this scene? And throughout the scene, and your character's going to change from the beginning of the scene to the end of the scene in a big way. And you have to be able to convey it in a real way, but also in a way that's exciting to the audience. Otherwise, the audience just isn't going to feel it, and they're not going to get excited either. But having those main characters get to practice on Wednesday nights makes it possible for them to focus on everybody else on these other night practices, so that we're not wasting motion. Now, I'm always going to try and do a personal highlight, and tonight I'm going to give you Troy Tony, who plays Jesus. And above all, it was mostly just stuff that Jesus said at the last week of his ministry. Now he's having to learn a lot of new lines, and he's having to learn how to deliver those lines, and then the actual memorization of those lines, so that he can deliver them in the most effective way. And being an apostle, I'm able to be around Troy, and he's expressed to me and to the whole apostles the weight of making sure he has his lines correct. Because for 90% of this production, people are going to be focused on him, if not more. And his lines have to be correct, and his delivery of the lines have to be correct. Otherwise, this production is not going to work. So he feels the weight of making sure his lines are correct and that the delivery of them is the right expression. Not just practically, but also he wants it to come from a spiritual place as well. And the words and the actions portrayed in this production can and will change lives. We've seen it with Messiah, and we've seen it with Above All in unique ways, and it's going to be unique with Jesus Messiah. And he knows the weight of this because he played Jesus in Above All. And he's taking this role very seriously. He knows it's a blessing to portray this role. He knows it's a ministry to portray this role. So if you're listening to this podcast and you want to have something to add to your prayer list, add Troy Tony's name, because for his mind and for his spirit and for his strength to be able to portray Christ in the right way, the way that Christ wants him to portray him, so that we can have an amazing production and that can change lives. Now, in summary from this podcast today, Jesus Messiah is a massive undertaking, and it takes a lot of detail to get it right, from the sets to where the characters are supposed to be, to what the characters are supposed to say and how they're supposed to say it. And like I said, the analogy I've been giving you, it's a puzzle. And we're getting the corners and the sides in place right now with our timing, our placement, and basic delivery of lines in action. As we go along, we're going to begin to fill in the center until we have a full portrait. And our hope is that what is presented is a complete, beautiful, and meaningful service for those desiring to find inspiration and direction through the story of Jesus Christ. Next time, I'm going to have some detailed insights about the specific scenes that I've been involved in for the next week, and we should have some more stuff fleshed out. So I might even go back to a couple of these scenes and give you some more detail into those scenes that we've already been practicing. I'm going to also talk about the balance of doing practices, having a family, and running a Sunday school class and podcast. I told you a little bit about that tonight, but I'm going to give you a little bit more detail, a little bit more insight into my life. I'm obviously going to continue to update you weekly on the full experience of being in Jesus Messiah and what my thoughts and observations are as I go through this journey. And I hope you join me. It's going to be a great experience. I'm excited to be able to share my experience along the way, and I hope if you are in the area during Palm Sunday weekend and Easter weekend that you consider coming and witnessing Jesus Messiah and enjoying and being inspired by Christ's life. And I hope it can change your life, and I hope this podcast helps you. If you are ever considering being involved in a production or something like this, or wanting your church to be involved in a production like this, I hope some of the insights that you get from this helps you along the way. And if nothing else, I hope that the idea that there's a church out there that wants to portray Christ in a meaningful way, I hope that inspires you to, in your own relationship with Jesus Christ. So until next time, I'm Chris Ferris, and this is the TWTL Podcast. God bless and keep searching.